Positive versus negative reinforcement. I talked about this in the previous plenary. I assume most of you were here. Positive reinforcement is when I give you something you want. Negative reinforcement is when I take away something you don't want. One of the problems in drug courts is that what we reward people with is taking away what they don't want. And what they don't want is what? Treatment, supervision, engagement in the program. We spend all of our time rewarding people with negative reinforcement. That is fine if the person doesn't need treatment. You got a low-risk abusing individual, they got to go to their counseling sessions, but hey, if you can clean up and stay clean and behave yourself, I'll reward you. You don't have to go. That's fine. But for the addicted individual, taking away the one thing that's keeping them from using is contraindicated. So high need, focus on positive reinforcement. Low need, focus on negative reinforcement. Okay? Everybody got that? I want you to use all of your quadrants. Now let's get into some of the basic laws of behavior modification. I'm going to start with the universal laws, and then we're going to drill down to laws that get more specific to the populations, to different kinds of populations. The number one law of behavior modification is the law of certainty. The more certain it is that you will respond to an infraction with a sanction or respond to a reward, an achievement with a reward, the better the effects on behavior. Number one law. Now we talk about this in terms of schedules of reinforcement or ratios of behaviors to consequences. So if I said to you, make eye contact with me, and every time I see the whites of your eyes, I'll give you an M&M. Okay, so your eye, there's one, there's one, there's one, every time I see your eye. If I give you an M&M every time I see your eyes, the ratio of the reward to the behavior, the M&M to the eye contact, is 1-to-1. We call that a fixed ratio 1 or an FR1 schedule. If I gave you a reward every 5th time I saw your eyes, that would be an FR5. If I give it to you every 10 times, it's an FR10. Okay? Law number 1, the closer you get to an FR1 schedule, the better the effects on behavior for initiating a new behavior, and the further away you get from an FR1 schedule, the weaker the effects. Now, how many of you have your clients on FR1 schedules? Good. You guys are not so naive as to believe that when a participant turns in a positive urine specimen, you've caught their one instance of drug use. Although that's what they'll say to you, oh my God, the one time I used, you happen to catch me. But in fact, you're catching them every 5 times, every 10 times if you're lucky, all right? The problem is your enemy has them on an FR1 behavioral schedule. Who's your enemy? Drugs. Take the drug, get the reward. Take the drug, get the reward. Drugs make you feel good every time. So drugs start you on an FR1 positive reinforcement schedule. Now, once you have somebody reliably engaging in the behavior, you want to thin the reinforcement to keep them chasing the reward. So once I got you making eye contact with me, now I'm going to start giving you an M&M every 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. So you'll keep chasing that reward. That's called thinning the reinforcement. How do drugs thin the reinforcement? Through tolerance. Your clients tell you, I used to get really high, now I have to use more drugs to get half as high. They're chasing that reward. The drugs are thinning the positive reinforcement. Then what happens over time when your clients get addicted to the drugs? They say, you know what, I don't even use drugs anymore to feel good. I use drugs, what? Stop feeling sick. Stop the craving. Stop the withdrawal. What do we call that? Negative reinforcement. Take the drug, sickness goes away. Take the drug, cravings go away. So drugs start you on an FR1 positive reinforcement schedule. Through the mechanism of tolerance, they thin the reinforcement to get you to chase the reward. Then through the mechanism of withdrawal and cravings, they switch you to an FR1 negative reinforcement schedule and keep you on that for the rest of your life. What you need to understand is that is the quintessential perfect behavior modification schedule. That is what B.F. Skinner himself couldn't have come up with. It's so good. Anybody want to guess why drugs are such perfect behavior modifiers? Darwinian evolution. That's why. Plants need to be able to reliably attract pollinators, especially plants in desert environments where it may be miles to the nearest pollinator. They need to be absolutely certain that lizard, that bug, that bee will come back reliably and pollinate me. So they have, through millions of years of Darwinian evolution, created chemicals that would talk to the brain of that lizard, capture that lizard's brain, and make sure that lizard comes back. Where are the most addictive drugs grown? In sparse environments where there aren't a lot of pollinators, right? Afghanistan and desert environments and the like. The problem is that these drugs, although they were never intended to capture your brains, from a biological and neurological perspective, your brains are not appreciably different than that of a lizard when it comes to drugs. They are talking to the middle section of your brain, the limbic system of your brain, that operates the same as a lizard's. In fact, we call it the reptilian brain because it hasn't changed much evolutionarily. Any of you who don't believe me, go down to the local watering hole on a Friday night and you will see all the lounge lizards engaged in their predatory behaviors. Point is, these drugs were created to capture mammalian brains, insect brains. That's what they're there for. They're really good. So if you want to beat millions of years of Darwinian evolution, you better be damn good too. It should be clear to you why we always lose. Because we're fighting this brilliant behavior modifier. So, if you want to be close to an FR1 schedule, the first thing you have to do is reliably detect the behavior. If you do not reliably detect the behavior, then there's no way you could possibly be responding with certainty. You'll be nowhere near an FR1 schedule. What the research is telling us for drug courts is that means you must do random drug testing at least twice a week, including weekends and holidays. Drug courts that are doing drug testing once a week or once a month have terrible outcomes. Why? How long do the typical metabolites of drugs of abuse remain detectable in bodily fluid? About 48 to 72 hours. So if you want to catch the behavior, you want to know whether or not they're using, you need to test at least, if you're going to do it regularly, 3 times a week, every other day. You can get away with random twice a week, or you can get away with twice a week only if it is truly random. What that means is you can't test in blocks. You can't say, well, in a 7-day period, you'll be tested twice. Because they are mini pharmacologists. They do all the math in their heads. I mean, these guys could have found the cure to cancer if they applied their genius in other ways. Their color comes up on Monday. It comes up again on Wednesday. They now know they have 4 days before they can be tested again. Therefore, they must be tested randomly. Every day is a new day. Any day I can be tested. Any single day. You must test on weekends and holidays. When is drug and alcohol use most likely to occur? On weekends and holidays. So if you're not testing on weekends and holidays, you're missing drug use. If you miss drug use, you are getting farther away from an FR1 schedule, and you were fighting against an enemy that never makes a mistake. You're going to lose. It doesn't matter how much you want to win. It doesn't matter how much you care about people. You are violating the #1 law of behavior modification, and you're going to lose. Sufficient detection windows and panels. If you are testing for the typical NIDA 5-panel screen, you're not picking up buprenorphine. You're not picking up oxycodone. You're not picking up Vicodin. In other words, you're not picking up the drugs they're actually using. They figure out pretty quickly what you're testing for, and they use something else. That's what they do. I want you to understand that at least the first 90 days that these participants are in your program, the only thing they're thinking about is how to fool you. That's it. Nothing else. That's not what they're telling you. They're thanking you for all the great things you're doing for them, how wonderful you are, but all in fact they're trying to do is figure out how to beat your system. That's it. So if you're going to be weak, if you're going to be naive, you're going to lose. Okay? Get your testing down, get it down right. Do a full 20-panel screen randomly in your community once every month or a couple months. pick a random day and do a bigger screen to see if there are other drugs out there that are being used. You don't have to do it on everybody, but if you start seeing positive tests for Vicodin, then you need to add that to your standard panel, okay? Because one thing I can guarantee you, if I take Vicodin and it doesn't get picked up, every other person in the milieu will know the same day they're not testing for Vicodin. Okay? It's very contagious. They'll all be doing it within a couple of weeks. Okay? Community supervision. Those of you who were in my earlier talk today know this. If you have a pretty decent drug court, you're doing what typical drug courts do. You are supervising about 10 to 12% of participants' time. The point is, most of their time, they're not in your programs. And that's when they're doing all the bad things they're not supposed to be doing. That's when they're acting out. So if you are not sampling their behavior in the community, you have no idea what they're doing. So you need to go to their home and make sure they're following their curfew. You need to see if their house is clean, if their kids' homework is done. Are there beer bottles in the trash can? Are there pharmaceuticals in the medicine chest? Are there any bottles labeled not for human consumption anywhere in the house? Those of you who were just in Helen Harbert's talk, anything that says not for human consumption is probably being abused, okay? Bath salts and the like. So you want to be looking for those kinds of things. You need to show up at their house when they don't know you're coming. You show up at 10 o'clock, you leave. When do you come back? At 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock. So they know that there's no respite after you've been there. Do you have to do this with everybody all the time? No. Do this with 10% of your participants. Make sure you get it front-loaded the first month or so in the program. They will get the message, these people mean what they're doing. They show up at your house. Word gets out to the community, they know they're being monitored, okay? You've got to be looking out there. You can't take an ostrich roll in drug courts, where if you don't see it, it isn't happening, okay? And the reason is because you're literally violating the fundamental rule of behavior modification. When should you reduce drug testing? The short answer is, the easy answer is never. Of course, it can't be never, but never while they're in your program. Why? What do many drug courts do? Phase 1, we test twice a week. Phase 2, we test once a week. Phase 3, once a month. What else are you doing? You're reducing treatment, right? You're reducing other types of supervision. What happens when you reduce supervision? What happens when you reduce treatment? Drug use comes back. That's what happens, okay? Take it to the bank. If you're dealing with addicts, less treatment, less supervision, more drug use. Direct relationship, okay? So if you're reducing services over time, just as the risk of drug use is going up, if you're doing drug testing less often, your ability to detect it is going down. And that's why drug courts are always telling me, you know, we have these participants, they're doing so well. 6 months, no problems, they're abstinent, and then all of a sudden, the whole case falls apart, they disappear on us. It doesn't work that way. That case was falling apart for weeks or months. You didn't know it. Why didn't you know it? Because you weren't monitoring them, that's why. So you do not reduce drug testing until you have reduced everything else. And you are sure that when you reduce those other services, they're remaining abstinent. Okay? Then and only then do you reduce drug testing. Otherwise, their use comes back as soon as you start seeing them less often. It's just that simple. Second chances. One more thing about certainty. So, participant comes into a drug court, has a positive drug test. The judge says to the participant, now, Bill, you know, normally I would sanction you for that positive drug test, but it's a beautiful day, you know, the sun is shining, birds are singing, I just saved money on my car insurance, so I'm not going to sanction you this time, but if you do it again, I will sanction you next time. What has that judge just done? That judge has just moved Bill from an FR1 schedule to an FR2 schedule. Or, since you're only catching him every 5 or 10 times to begin with, from an FR5 to an FR10 or an FR10 to an FR20. In other words, the judge has just ruined Bill's behavior modification plan. Now, you may say to me, but wait a minute, don't we believe in second chances? Don't we believe in redemption? Well, let me give you a second scenario. Bill lapses, uses drugs on Friday. Saturday calls his sponsor, goes to his meetings Saturday and Sunday. Monday morning comes in, tells his PO, you don't have to test me, I used. Take whatever you got to offer, okay? And I want to talk to my counselor. Judge in the status review says, now Bill, normally I would sanction you for that drug use. But because you sought out your sponsor, because you told the truth, because you went to treatment, I'm not going to apply the sanction. What is that an example of? Negative reinforcement. The judge is withholding the sanction to reward truth-telling behavior. Now, you say, well, wait a minute, Doug. These guys figure this out pretty quickly. They say, this is a great program. I get to use it as long as I tell the truth. They don't punish me. No, as we'll get to, you do that for maybe the first time. Now that they've shown the ability to tell the truth, what used to be distal becomes proximal. You're no longer rewarding them for it. It's expected, okay? So you start by rewarding honesty. Once you've been honest once or twice, I expect you to be honest. Now we move on to other things, okay? So that is called effective behavior modification. So if a client takes concrete steps to correct a mistake, they tell the truth, they seek out treatment, they make efforts to improve their own behavior, that is and you withhold the sanction to reward that, that is called negative reinforcement, that is called effective behavior modification. If you withhold the sanction because it makes you feel good about yourself, that's called narcissism, okay? Does everybody see the difference? I don't care what you feel about punishment. I couldn't care less. If you believe, I don't believe we should be punishing people, that's fine. Find another line of work. You're of no value in this group, this profession. There are other places where you'll do wonderful things. If you believe we should not be rewarding offenders for doing things that we should all be doing anyway, that's fine, I understand. Please find another line of work. Go somewhere else and work in another venue. This is not for you. If your goal is improving behavior, if your goal is saving lives, then you have to follow the laws of behavior modification, because drugs always follow the laws of behavior modification. They never fail, okay? Now, certainty is law number one. Law number two is the law of celerity. Now, it's celerity, not celery. People are, what does celery have to do with behavior modification? It's celerity. Celerity means rapidity, immediacy. The point here is that time is not on your side. The effects of sanctions and rewards begin to degrade within 1 hour. Within 1 hour of the time an offender commits a crime, commits an infraction, and you come in with a sanction an hour later, or does something good and you come in an hour later with a reward, the effects begin to decline, and they decline over time. And that decline is not linear, that decline is exponential. Now, what does that mean? It means 10 days is not twice as weak as 5 days. It can be 25 times as weak. It's 5 squared. Remember your nonlinear equations from algebra in high school? All right, I see some post-traumatic reactions. That's all the math here today. Take my word for it. They decline rapidly over time. And the reason for that is there is interference from new behaviors. Now imagine, participant uses drugs on Monday. That same participant is abstinent, well-behaved, goes to all his or her sessions Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Comes into a status hearing on Friday, and the judge imposes a sanction for the drug use that occurred on Monday. Which is closer in time to the sanction? The drug use that occurred on Monday, or all the good behaviors that occurred on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? The good behaviors are closer in time, and behavior modification works by proximity in time. That is why the effects of sanctions and rewards decline exponentially. Now, the good news is that even though things begin to impair after an hour, the research is telling us that with human beings, high risk, even addicted human beings, your 2-week limit is basically your outside target. You can get away with a 2-week delay. Once you start getting beyond 2 weeks, the effects decline exponentially. They're already declining even over 2 weeks, but you lose efficacy after about 2 weeks. What that means is you must hold your status hearings every 2 weeks or more often, so that too much time does not elapse between the infraction and the imposition of the consequence. Okay? Now, it is true that once people are regularly following their treatment plans, you can reward them by reducing to about every 4 weeks, maybe every 6 weeks. Once you get beyond 4 or 6 weeks, you lose efficacy again, the case falls apart again, okay? So you start them every 2 weeks or more often, and you keep them about every 4 to 6 weeks until they are in their aftercare plan, the last phase of the program, okay? Now, some people ask me, well, what about every week? Is every week better than every 2 weeks? The answer is that every week is better than every 2 weeks, but it's not so much better that it's worth the cost. You can get away with every 2 weeks. It's good enough, okay? Now, some people have said to me, well, we hold our status hearings once a month, and that's working just fine for us. So, your research must be wrong. And, what the research is telling us is, yes, there are times when you might reach that conclusion. That's when you're dealing with people who are low risk and non-addicted. In other words, people who are not likely to engage in infractions anyway. So you don't have to worry about long delay intervals because the behaviors aren't occurring. So if you can get away with a monthly status review, chances are you're dealing with a low-level population, okay? The other possibility is the ostrich effect. You're seeing them every 4 to 6 weeks, so you don't know what they're doing, and so in fact the cases aren't doing that well, you're just not monitoring them closely enough. I want you to know 2 weeks is a strong finding. I did a study, I randomly assigned participants in drug courts. Half see the judge every 2 weeks, half see the judge every 4 weeks. When you do something like that, you have to have an ethics board oversee your study to make sure nobody's being harmed by your study. The ethics board stopped my studies, a federally funded study. They stopped my study prematurely on ethical grounds because the participants who were seeing the judge every 4 weeks were doing so badly, it was no longer permissible to have half the participants seeing the judge every 4 weeks. That's how strong this effect is. Been replicated in Australia, New Zealand. It's a powerful effect, okay? And it's based on law number 2 of behavior modification, the law of celerity. Non-compliance hearings were indicated. Now, you start people every 2 weeks. You reduce down. At some point, they're coming in every 4 weeks, maybe every 6. Participant on that less schedule commits a serious infraction. They're phase 3 of the program. All of a sudden, they abscond for a week. Or all of a sudden they use drugs for a week. Their next status hearing is not scheduled for a month out. You bring them in at the next scheduled employment on a noncompliance review. You don't wait, and they know they can be brought in on a noncompliance review for a serious infraction, okay? Law number 3, the law that we violate the most often of all, is the law of magnitude. Now, we used to think that magnitude was a linear function. The higher the magnitude, the better the effects on behavior. We now know that magnitude follows what we call a curvilinear function, which means the best effects are in the middle zone and the weakest effects are at either extreme. I want you to think about Goldilocks and the 3 bears, okay? Remember Goldilocks? The porridge could be too hot or too cold. The bed could be too hard or too soft. And you're looking for that just right, in the middle, baby bear zone. That's what you're looking for with sanctions and rewards. The best effects are in the middle. Sanctions that are too low in magnitude lead to boiling the frog. Remember boiling the frog from the plenary? And sanctions that are too high in magnitude, or rewards that are too high in magnitude, lead to what's called ceiling effects. You run out of your highest magnitude sanctions before you get started. Once you run out of your sanctions, you lose control over the case. Now, where does the criminal justice system traditionally operate? Here and here. Low-level diversion, diversion, diversion. That's it. You had your chance. 12 to 18 months. Habituation, 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 ceiling effect. That is the way the criminal justice system operates. That is why drug courts said, wow, we need to fill in the middle zone here with a whole range of intermediate magnitude sanctions and rewards. Community service, jury box, essays, all the things that we use in those programs because that's where all the action is. The problem is that drug courts are getting lazy. And many drug courts I go to have low-level sanctions and rewards and high-level sanctions and rewards, and they have not filled out the middle zone where all of the action is. So if your team gets together in a team meeting and the judge says, well, I see here that Bill has missed several counseling sessions and has several positive specimens, what are we going to do about him? And some person said, well, Judge, you could give him a stiff talking to, really let him have it. Okay, that's good, I like that. What else can we do? Well, you could throw his ass in jail, Judge. Okay, good, that's two. What else can we do? That's about it. You're going to feel very impotent. And when you feel impotent, who are you going to take it out on? Bill. Well, that's it, we tried everything. He's just not motivated. Get him the hell out of here. Make room for somebody who wants to make use of our services. Now, I've always wondered, where is this long line of motivated people that are just waiting to make use of your services? They don't exist. They're all the same. You replace Bill with one unmotivated person with another unmotivated person. On the other hand, if you say, well, we have a whole range. We've got various kinds of community service obligations he can do. We've got special reporting centers. We can put him on a monitored curfew. We can do day reporting. We can do this. We can do this. All of a sudden, you're like, okay, we got a lot of options. I think we can work with him. So ask yourself how many sanctions and how many rewards you actually have. And have you filled in that middle zone? Now, it's actually off the website now, but it will be back up within a week or 2 weeks. We go around the country and collect lists of sanctions and rewards being used all over the country, and we kind of sort them into relative magnitudes. We took it off because we're updating it, but if you go to our website, allrise.org, you'll be able to find it, download it for free, and you don't have to use them all, but it will give you some ideas about how to be creative in filling in the middle zone. Okay? Procedural fairness. When it comes to every species on Earth except human beings, I only need to know the schedule of reinforcement, the timing of reinforcement, and the magnitude to predict the effects on behavior. You tell me whether it's positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, FR1, FR5, what the levels are, and I can predict the effects on pigeons, rodents, amoebas, you name it. When it comes to human beings have this incredibly irritating need to be treated fairly. And if they're not treated fairly, all the laws of behavior modification go out the window, and what should have improved behavior doesn't. Okay? If I shine a light on an amoeba in a petri dish to train the amoeba to move to the right side of the dish, the amoeba doesn't look up at me and say, hey, how come you didn't shine a light on that amoeba? Okay? But people want to know what you're doing to everybody else. When people say they want to be treated like their own unique individual, no, they don't. Everybody wants to be treated the same as everybody else. It's a basic human need to be treated evenly and fairly. So, clearly communicated policies and procedures. I mentioned this earlier. Drug courts that build their sanctions individually and their rewards individually for each person have the worst outcomes of all. Why is that? Because it's perceived and may in fact be unfair. You think you're giving people the right consequences, but you may be aghast to find out that you treat different kinds of people differently for reasons that are irrelevant to their behavior. Okay? Male, female, tall, short, black, white, you name it. Reminds me of my mother, doesn't remind me of my mother. Happened to get up after a particularly bad case. One guy gets up, he's done really bad things, I hit him hard. Next person gets up, what they did doesn't seem as bad compared to what he did, and I wind up going down because I'm making judgments based on what happened 10 minutes ago instead of what the appropriate response is. The most effective drug courts set their consequences in advance. These are the target behaviors, these are the consequences, these are how they build over time, and communicate that to participants and staff. The least effective drug courts don't. Direct relationship, okay? Because it violates perceptions of fairness. Number two, you don't have to follow these consequences rigidly. These are your presumptive consequences. Presumptively, the first positive specimen in phase 1 would get this kind of a consequence. However, when the team gets together, if there is a good reason to override the presumption, that's fine. Team has to start with what the presumptive consequence was. Those are the most effective teams. So your starting point for discussion is what your gradient says the appropriate response would be. It's not the ending point, it's the starting point for the conversation. Opportunity to be heard. Client number one gets up before the judge. The judge says, Bill, I see you had a positive urine specimen. 24-hour jail hold. Bailiff, take him. I'll see you on tomorrow morning or Tuesday morning, whatever. Okay? Client number two gets up before the judge. Fred, I see you had a positive urine specimen. What's going on? Oh, judge, see what happened was I was riding the car with my buddies, and they were smoking, okay, and I told them to keep the window open, but they wouldn't, and it was cold outside, and I must have gotten some secondhand smoke. So you're saying that it was because of their smoking in the car that came, really. Bill, a counselor who does the drug testing, is it possible to get a positive drug test on a secondhand smoke? Very unlikely, Judge, probably 1 in 10,000, okay? Carol, counselor, does his contract say that he's not supposed to be hanging out with his friends? Yes, and he's not supposed to be in a car with anybody without a valid license? Correct, okay. So you now have 3 additional infractions, by the way, compared to the drug testing infraction. Do you want to restate your response? Let me talk to my defense counsel, that's fine. Oh, you know what, Judge, there was that one time, you're right, now that I think about it, there was one time when I just took a puff. Okay, great, 24-hour jail hold. Now, client number one gets worse, client number two gets better. Now, wait a minute. They both smoke marijuana, they both got a 24-hour jail hold. Client number one gets worse and client number two gets better? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, because client number one wasn't given a chance to explain. The court didn't follow its procedures. Client number two had a chance to explain, to confer with counsel. Well, you got me, perceives the imposition of the consequences fairer, and does better. In other words, it's not about reality, it's about perception. The perception that you were listening. The perception that you followed the rules. One of the reasons why drug courts do better than many other programs is because they're perceived as fairer. They're perceived as fairer because you go through all these machinations to be fair. Very often clients see judges as fairer than probation officers. Very often clients see judges as fairer than their counselors because their counselors don't give them due process, right? You guys get right in on the issue and tell them what you think. You should do that. But it's sometimes perceived as they're not listening. Respect and dignity, yelling at people, putting people down makes outcomes worse, okay? People should be treated with respect, opportunity to be heard, and they need to have known in advance what the consequences were going to be, okay? That's the easy part. The basic laws of behavior modification is the easy part. Certainty means reliable detection. Celerity means hold your status reviews every 2 weeks or more frequently. Magnitude, remember intermediate responses are most important, and procedural fairness. Now we're going to get into where drug courts have the biggest problems. We're going to go from where the science meets the art of clinical application. Now I've already introduced several of these concepts, so we can move a little fairly quickly. If your expectations for people are too high, if you ask more from them than they're capable of doing, not only will they not get better, they will get worse. That's what the word learned helplessness means. There's another term called ratio burden. Well, that's just a fancy term for the number of things I have to do to stay out of trouble. Typical client in a drug court gets a message something like this. Well, look, if you show up at your counseling session tomorrow, you won't be sanctioned. If you show up at your status hearing, you won't be sanctioned. If you show up at your job session, your vocational session, you won't be sanctioned. If you deliver a urine specimen, you won't be sanctioned. If the urine specimen is negative, you won't be sanctioned. Now, what the client is hearing is, I got to do 10 things, and if I fail to do any one of those 10 things, I'm going to be punished. Screw it. I can't keep 10 balls in the air, so I'll let them all fall. That's what ratio burden means. Which is why when you're dealing with addicted people, you shouldn't be front-loading all your expectations. They're barely conscious, truly addicted people in phase 1. The 12-step community has a great adage for this. Fake it till you make it, right? They go, we know you're barely paying attention. We know you're feeling stark raving mad. We know you're uncomfortable. We know you want to kill somebody or kill yourself. Just get to the program. Get there and listen. Fake it till you make it. They understand you'll get the concepts later. Just show up. And that's what we should be doing. Drug courts that throw lots of requirements at people are good if those people are not addicted. If they're just antisocial, low needs people, that's fine. But if you're dealing with true addicts, you're asking too much, and you will get learned helplessness. Don't expect too little, on the other hand, if your expectations are too low, because then you're boiling the frog. Remember boiling the frog? So how do we handle this? I already introduced this concept. You guys know the difference between proximal and distal behaviors, right? Proximal is something I'm capable of doing now. Distal is something I'm not capable of doing yet. If I'm capable of doing it and it's easy, you're going to sanction high and reward low. If I'm not capable of doing it, it's too hard, you're going to sanction low and reward high. Everybody remember that from the last plenary? Okay. Phase specificity. Your programs have different phases. Phase 1 is initiation into treatment, getting a sponsor, following a curfew, getting assessments done. Phase 2 is initiation of sustained sobriety. Phase 3 is pro-social job training, literacy, adopting pro-social activities. Phase 4, relapse prevention, aftercare preparation, or something like that. If you have different phases in your programs, but your expectations for your clients are the same in Phase 1 as they are in Phase 2, what's the point of having different phases? The purpose of phase advancement is to tell the client what used to be distal is now proximal. That's what phase advancement is for. It used to be that we considered sustained sobriety hard for you and we made treatment adjustments. Now you're in Phase 2. We've got the right treatment, you've initiated sobriety, now the consequences are going to be higher for positive drug tests in Phase 2. Each phase, the expectations are going up. They're not going down, they're going up. Okay? We already covered this, so this again is a repeat. For people who are truly and correctly diagnosed as addicted, abstinence, and they have a triggered binge pattern, cravings, or withdrawal, abstinence is a distal goal. For people who are abusers, abstinence is a proximal goal, which means Phase 1, your proximal behaviors for addicts are getting up on time, following a curfew, getting to your sessions on time, finding a sponsor, getting your assessments. In other words, faking it till you make it, going through the program and stabilizing your routine. That's Phase 1. Phase 2 is initiation of sustained sobriety. Abstinence is distal in Phase 1. It becomes proximal beginning and going into Phase 2. For your abusers, Phase 1 is initiation of sustained sobriety. They're capable of stopping now, therefore they better stop now. Now there are drug courts out there that tell me, here's the way our phase structure works. First phase is 3 months. You have to be abstinent for 3 months, and then you go on to Phase 2. Phase 2, you have to be abstinent for 6 months. Then you go on to Phase 3, you have to be abstinent for 9 months. Okay? That's an illogical phase structure. First of all, for addicts, expecting 3 months of sustained sobriety in Phase 1 is not realistic. If you can get 3 months of sustained sobriety from the very beginning, they weren't an addict to begin with. Okay? Point number 2 is if your requirement for Phase 1 is sobriety, and then your ultimate requirement for Phase 2 is sustained sobriety, and Phase 3 is sustained sobriety, then you don't really have different phases. You really are saying you want 12 months of sobriety. That's all you're saying. Okay? The point is, your phases need to have meaning, and you shouldn't have time periods for them. Our first phase is 3 months. Well, what if it takes them 4 months to meet the requirements to get out of that phase? What if it takes them 5 months? What if it takes them 2 months to meet those requirements? In other words, they're mastery requirements. Once you meet the obligation, You move on to the next phase and the requirements get higher. So when you set your sanctions and incentive gradients, you have different proximal and distal behaviors for each phase of the program. Everybody see it? Okay. And we already discussed regimen compliance. Tangible rewards. I already commented earlier that for seriously addicted individuals, negative reinforcement around treatment obligations is really contraindicated. Okay? We talked about that earlier. You should be increasing treatment as they clear, not decreasing treatment. So you want to be using positive reinforcement with that population. Positive reinforcement is most important for people who don't get a lot of reinforcement in their natural lives. If I don't have a job, if I don't have family members, I don't have friends, I don't have people that reward me, I've never been told anything positive about me in my whole life. Those are the people who need and are desperate for the positive reinforcement, okay? And so we need to find ways to provide positive reinforcement in a way that is not too expensive. There are lots of ways to do it. One way is called the fishbowl procedure. You guys familiar with the fishbowl procedure? Fishbowl procedure, we just call it that because it began using a fishbowl. But every time I do something I'm supposed to do, I earn a draw from the fishbowl. My drug test is negative. Congratulations, here's your chit. That's a one pull from the fishbowl. Show up at my counseling session, congratulations, there's a chit, okay? The end of the week, I may have 5 chits. I get 5 draws from the fishbowl. Most of those draws get me little certificates that say I'm doing well in the program, okay? But most of them, maybe half, a smaller proportion of them are rewards of like $5 value, okay? Bus tokens, phone cards, McDonald's gift certificates have been used. There is a debate in the literature about whether that's a sanction or reward, but they have been used. And then you'll have a few, 1 or 2 or 3, higher magnitude rewards. Things that might be worth $25 or $30. But the chances of winning them are like 1 in 100. Most people will never win them. The possibility of getting those higher rewards is as reinforcing and sometimes more reinforcing than if you actually give people rewards every time. So the fishbowl procedure is a way for you to be doing positive reinforcement where the actual cost per participant may be no more than, less than $100 a year, okay? Minuscule. Giving people back reductions in fines. I have to pay a $200 fine. I get a chit, now my fine's only $180. Now it's only $170. That's like giving people money because they got to make those payments, okay? Now some people have said, now wait a minute, that fishbowl thing, I think that sounds like gambling and I don't want to have people, it's going to increase gambling behavior. Now look, there is something critically different between the fishbowl procedure and gambling, okay? And if you don't see the difference, don't gamble, all right? When you gamble, you can lose, and you can lose big. And much of the addiction to gambling is the risk of loss for the payoff. We have done the fishbowl procedure with gambling addicted people, and they yawn. This ain't gambling. You just win a big prize or a small prize based on having done behaviorally well in treatment. It has no effect on gambling behaviors whatsoever, okay? By the way, when you give participants rewards, a lot of you are saying, well, wait a minute, if you give them a $5 gift certificate, they're just going to go out, sell it for $3 and buy drugs with it. The answer is that is a possibility, and it does happen for your high-risk, non-addicted individuals, right? Your low left quadrant people, that sometimes happens. With your addict population and with your low-risk people, it doesn't happen. The expenditures are on groceries, socks, underwear, gifts for their kids, and things like that. If they use the money to buy drugs, they're going to test positive the next time, and they're not going to get the rewards, and they're going to lose the rewards. The rewards are contingent on abstinence. So this fear that they're going to misuse it is not borne out with the addict population, okay? Symbolic rewards. In 12-step programs, I get my 30-day chip. You guys know about a 30-day chip? And you get how much is the monetary value of that 30-day chip? About 5 cents to make it, 10 cents? Watch what happens when these people lose their 30-day chip, when they lose their year chip. Try this when you give people certificates in the program for phase advancement. Just every now and then, just forget, just neglect to call somebody up for their certificate. I mean, it's actually cruel to do it because it hurts them. These are things that cost nothing, but they're positive reinforcement. It's a piece of paper, but it means a lot to people who don't get those rewards, okay?